Get ready. Get set. Hold on. It's time for the Mouth of Matuszak radio show. Welcome to Tuesday morning. So, how is everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing well this morning. And Tuesday morning, yesterday was our inaugural radio show. Had a few people tune in and want to give a real quick shout out to my first YouTube podcast subscriber, Jared Day. Good morning, Jared, or afternoon if you're listening to this later on. And we talked about a few stories yesterday, some of which we're probably going to touch on those topics again today. However, before we get to that, does everybody remember Octomom, the mother who gave birth to 8 fraternal, well, some fraternal, I guess a couple of them were actually identical twin-type siblings. Well, Octomom, otherwise known as Nadia Suleiman, pled no contest yesterday to a misdemeanor charge that some of us wonder how it could be misdemeanor considering it was fraud, defrauding the federal government. She received more than $26,000 in public assistance to care for her total of 14 children, and she was sentenced to a whole whopping 200 hours of community service and 2 years of probation, and she has to pay a small fine. I think that small fine should probably be about twice what she defrauded, give the taxpayers back what she stole. And let's call a spade a spade. She stole the money. And, this story is all over the various news wires. ABC is covering it. HuffPo is covering it. Everybody seems to be covering it from various different angles. It's an AP story, Associated Press story, written by John Rogers. That came out first thing up this morning. Or no, correction, came out yesterday afternoon. Still, Octomom, shame on you, being the big hero of motherhood and wanting to look to Big Daddy Uncle Sugar to take care of everything for you. If you're going to have that many kids, work. Or be married, and, well, you still work, taking care of the house and the children, and your spouse works to provide the food and pay the bills. Isn't that how everything was designed? How it should be? Kind of the way the world works? I mean, let's look in nature. Everybody says, or not everybody, I've heard people say that monogamy is a human condition and only humans do this, and it's artificially created. That is patentedly false. Many birds of prey, raptors, mate for life. And when they're going through their child raising, their, laying of the eggs and incubating them, and then feeding the young before they're ready to fly off on their own and leave the nest, one will stay and take care of the young, and the other one will hunt, as long as it's still alive anyway. Or one will protect the nest from above and circle around and make sure nobody is a threat, while the other one hunts and brings it back and feeds the kids, etc. And that's out in nature. And then people are going to say, well, that's birds. What about mammals? There's no family values in mammals other than human beings. Not entirely true there either. There have been cited studies within the apes showing family units. I'm not an expert in this, of course, but I've read several studies. Whether or not they've been validated or not is a different story, but they're out there. And then wolves. Wolves set up their packs, but they also mate for life. So, again, that's kind of the way the world works. Whichever religious view you may ascribe to, or including the religion of no gods, otherwise known as atheism, there still is some kind of scientific design that says we are built to be monogamous family units. Even within the same-sex coupling kind of group of people out there, society or culture or community, whatever tribal buzzword you want to use for that, there are those who want same-sex marriages because they want to raise a family in some way, shape, or form, whether through adoption or through surrogate parenthood from outside their couple. It's still to raise a family. It goes back to that whole family values thing, staying in a family unit, two parents raising kids. One of those parents should not be Uncle Sugar. Just my take on things. You might disagree. You're welcome to, but that's my take on it. Now that we've gone over our little rant on family values and talking about Octomom and how she kind of defrauded the American taxpayers, I can speak today, I promise. Let's talk about a little book by Mick Manning and Brita Granstrom entitled How Did I Begin? Not a great book. It covers a lot of things. It might be good for a 7th, 8th grader, maybe a high schooler, maybe even going as low as like 5th or 6th grade. But this book is written for preschoolers. I want to stay in the G, maybe PG realm here. But go ahead and do a Google search for the book, How Did I Begin? By Mick Manning and Brita Granstrom. And see what they produced. And this book is being used in some schools in England, allegedly, according to the Daily Mail and a site here in the U.S. called EAG News, or Education Action Group, I think, is what they call themselves. EAG.org. They found out that this is being used for preschoolers for human sexuality classes. And they reported on, well, they did their commentary on a Daily Mail story that originated out of the UK, and have some excerpts from the book that you might just want to read for yourself and try to decide if this is the kind of thing you want happening in the United States. Because there's elements within the Common Core community that are actually considering adding these to the curriculum for primary school or elementary school, grade school, however you want to call it, at a very young age, starting at like the preschool, kindergarten age. Kind of surprising. So, yeah, you have that going on. It's kind of reminiscent of books by Robbie Harris, many of which have been banned in Texas public schools for similar reasons. Some of which, looking them over, are nowhere near as graphic as the How Did I Begin book. So, I'm not big for book banning or book burning or any kind of censorship whatsoever. But it is up to us as parents to control, or in many cases we can't control it, but at least try to screen and decide what our children read and have access to and are exposed to, and when, and the timing behind that. That's parental responsibility, not a teacher's responsibility. So it's up to us to go into your schools and look at the curriculums, look at the materials they're using, and if you don't agree with it, or if you don't want your kids exposed to it, you just say no. First you have to ask, can I see? And then when you do see, if you don't like, then you can. You have the power as parents to say, no, not my kids. You're going to bring these books out. My kid is out of the room before you pull them out. Call me. I will come and pick them up, and I will do what parents do. But we've got to protect our kids, because there's elements out there who don't have their real best interests at heart and their real development at heart. They claim they do, but they don't. They're just trying to take away parental rights and say, oh, we know better. We're the experts. We know your kids better than you do. So you just leave it to us. We'll take care of them. Of course, if you talk to a lot of teachers, they complain about that very attitude too, because there's parents who have the attitude, I pay you taxes, so you're going to raise my kids for me. You're my surrogate parents. I'm going to work, and then I'm going to go and hang out with my friends in the afternoon, and I'll come back and pick them up because I have to pick them up by 6. Yeah, teachers are not surrogate parents. They are paid to assist parents in the education of children, and that education should be both intellectual and moral, and it should go in line with the parents' morality. Kind of difficult when you have so many different backgrounds in the classroom, but it does need to go in line with the parents' wishes. And if the parents don't like, parents can say no. Meanwhile, don't expect the teachers to raise your kids for you. Do your job yourself. Period. Okay, so we've done our little rant on education and our little rant on Octomom and welfare fraud. So, what else do we have going on? Again, while the show is live from 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time, adjust your clocks accordingly. Our call-in number here is 520-226-8567. So you're free to call in and discuss things. Remember, we keep things at a G to a PG level, and profanity isn't tolerated. And we try to keep it clean, but we try to keep it engaging. So if you do call, please keep that in mind, and keep in mind that we do have young listeners that listen to the podcast. So, no calls yet coming in, which is fine. This is only our second day. We haven't built up our following that much. Now, since we've talked about education, and we've talked about Octomom and welfare fraud, I guess what's the next thing on the agenda? We have so much. Do we want to talk about guns? I could talk about guns. Can you talk about guns? Let's talk about guns. They're so bad, aren't they? Well, I was over at BuzzPo this morning, checking out some of their articles there. And I want to bring this one up. So if you'll be patient as I do a couple of clicks here. But the title of the article I'm looking at is Finally, Armed Teachers in Texas. Now this is something that's been controversial ever since the Sandy Hook tragedy. You know, arming teachers on one side of the fence, and other people are saying, no, we need to further out, or push out the gun zone limits and keep guns out of there. The last thing we need is armed people getting all stressed out. And it really, there's evidence on both sides of that argument that can be debated back and forth. I just want to clearly state that you go to public schools in Israel, your teachers are armed. There are no school shootings in Israel. So consider that. You know, there's something to be said about something being done the right way. So, in Fort Worth, Texas, on Monday, training classes will officially begin to go through some of the training to arm some of the Texas teachers. This law got passed sometime in 2013. I'd have to go back and get the exact date. There were two versions of the bill that passed, and I think Perry vetoed one, but the other one got through. It requires the teachers first to have a CHL, a concealed handgun license. And then they can, through some mode of payment, either out of their own pocket, or in some cases it comes from the district, or in some cases subsidized by the state, but they undergo an additional 80 hours of training in a 9-day long class to meet the new standards to be armed. They're using a special term for this. Let me find it. Armed school marshals. And they get armed. They have to pass psychological examinations, go through the training. They have additional range time and rigorous physical activity. So they have to go through and learn to shoot, don't shoot, learn to use their firearm only in a last resort if there's no other option to use first to protect the kids and stop the active shooter. And they're only allowed in districts or schools that do not have an active police type presence, an armed presence in the school already. Now some districts claim they do because they have a small police force, but the police force is too small to put 2 armed guards in every single school in the district. So that kind of begs the question, do the teachers in those schools qualify or not? And I think that's kind of still out to the jury's still out on that. That still needs to be determined. But those schools that are more remote areas that don't have their own special school district police forces can get these armed marshals. And they're authorized up to 2 armed personnel per school, be they uniformed police or these armed school marshals. And that's what the state will pay for. If they want more, either it comes out of the school's budget, or the teachers can go and pay for the training out of their own pocket if they already have a CHL, a concealed handgun license. The program, according to the article on BuzzPo by Eric Reed, who's a great Second Amendment issue writer, and I suggest going to BuzzPo and looking at his stuff. He puts out pretty close to an article a day, it seems like, over there. Really, really well written. In fact, he's the president of Gun Rights Across America, GRAA. So, yeah, he's really into Second Amendment protections. But Eric says, or asks, does a program like this sound familiar? It should. You remember shortly after 9/11, the Federal Flight Deck Officer, Armed Airline Pilots program was initiated. Since the program's inception, the current number of hijackings that have occurred is 0. Why? When you're out to commit heinous acts, And when you have evil lurking in your heart, you tend to look at things from a slightly different perspective when you realize that the hunter can become the hunted. Bottom line, folks, I'm gonna dive deep into my old anti-terrorism and counterterrorism training when I was still in the U.S. Army. Terrorists, be they your standard criminals, I just want to scare people and do crime and shoot up schools, or those that actually are looking for some religious or political statement type terrorists, criminals, we can call them that, armed criminals, madmen, whatever term you want to use. Unless they're incredibly dumb, they don't look at a hard target to strike. They want to strike one that's soft, that's easier, that's complacent, that's unarmed, that's not paying attention, that is unprotected. They want the easiest one that will make the biggest statement. And that's why you have some of these school shootings and shootings at theaters that have no weapon policies, etc., etc. They look for places where there are going to be nobody that'll fight back or capable of fighting back in proportion. So, when you have, or could potentially have, a couple of teachers or school administrators or even janitors carrying concealed handguns to protect the school, and you're a bad guy, and you don't know if the school does or doesn't, because they don't publish the names, but they're allowed to, and you don't know who they are if they do, much less whether or not they actually have them there, and if they're there that day, if they're not out sick. But the potential's there, meaning you can walk in the door with whatever weapon you're carrying, intent on doing harm to innocent children, and find a Glock sounding off a report from down the hall, and you drop down with a big hole in your chest going, "What happened?" Probably less likely to choose that school as a target. It's just plain and simple. Along the same lines, Target gave out their soft, it's not a no-gun policy, it's a we'll respect your right to carry it, but please don't, and be respectful of our customers policy. Kind of the, we're not going to ban it, but we're going to say we don't like it. They put that little letter out, and less than 72 hours later, they get robbed. Or a Target got robbed by gunmen who said, hey, they're not letting people walk around with their guns anymore in the store, so freedom for us. Let's go do our bad stuff. The same concept. Think about it, folks. It's pure common sense. When you ban good, lawful people from being able to do something lawfully to protect themselves and protect the area, the only people who will break that ban are criminals who don't care about it anyway. They're going to go in regardless of the law, and now the law-abiding people aren't protected, so they're more free to do their crimes. It's just common sense. It's just pure logic. Now, when we're segueing from pure logic and firearms, let's stay with something else firearms related. For those who didn't see the news yesterday, evidently, our favorite POW, I guess is the term we're still using, innocent until proven guilty and all that, Bowe Bergdahl is released from his in-depth kind of inpatient type treatment. He's still going to be doing some outpatient stuff, I'm sure, but he's done with his reintegration training. Those of us who have spent time in the military, especially during the Iraq or Afghanistan wars, know what reintegration training is. Some of us have had it a little bit better than others. Some had it just kind of a hand wave, pencil whip type of thing. Some of us had some good in-depth training that kind of helped us out. But in any way, shape, or form, once again, and this is all over various news feeds, but I'm going to go to BuzzPo because they write it with a little bit of snark and edge, but still get the news out there. And this one comes from my friend Liz Harrison, great writer. Follow her on Twitter. She's at Galtwater Girl. Great writer, good person. She's also a really good producer for radio shows. I've been on a couple that she was doing the production for, to kind of give the host some free hands to be able to engage in conversation instead of having to click all kinds of buttons. Really, really good behind the scenes that way too. Liz, did I talk you up enough? Anyway, Bowe Bergdahl is back on active duty. Well, really, he never left active duty, guys. But yeah, it does for the civilian population. He's restored to full duty. He's going to be working in an office in this Fort Sam Houston area, somewhere around San Antonio, doing a military job, probably something that doesn't require a security clearance, but he's going back to work, and that's part of the reintegration. That's necessary. Meanwhile, out there, still circulating all over the place, especially among veterans, and especially among those who were with Bowe when he was captured or gave himself up, or whatever the case might be. We still have the questions about his loyalty to the United States and whether or not he was a desertion, or whether he was a deserter, rather, or a traitor, or whatever the case might be. People need to sit back and remember one simple thing. He has not been convicted. He hasn't even been formally charged. The investigation is ongoing. Until an investigation has enough evidence to warrant a trial, a court-martial, he needs to be allowed to go back to work and continue his duties and reintegrate. The public opinion may have already condemned him or not condemned him, but the truth of the matter is he has not yet been convicted. Not yet. If enough evidence is compiled, that may change. There are several people I know who would like to see that happen. Most of those people have some amount of evidence and a perception or perspective that allows that opinion. I wasn't there. I don't know. I've looked at the evidence back and forth myself. I could say it would be interesting to be on sit on that court-martial and see the evidence of both sides and weigh it back and forth. My jury, in my brain, is still out on it, but I will say there is some very compelling evidence out there that indicates he may have deserted. He may have been a traitor. The question's there. The investigation needs to go on. Let the investigation go. In the meantime, let the Army do what it does best. Let him go back to work. Let him sit his desk job and go about his life until such time comes. Don't push it. If you put, the problem is if you push these cases before enough evidence is compiled. Number one, you run a bigger risk of a potential bad guy going free. Number two, you also push a risk of a witch hunt, basically. And then he gets convicted, and then he appeals, and he gets overturned and goes free anyway. And no new evidence can be brought to bear in the prosecution because they done screwed up the first time. So keep that all in mind as y'all are looking at the Bowe Bergdahl case. The flip side of this, if you go to Liz's article, that she brings up some key points. The investigation's still ongoing. She says, naysayers are just paranoid and probably miss the fact that the Army already determined that there's no evidence Bergdahl engaged in misconduct while in captivity. Well, there is some, there isn't some. That's why there's still an investigation going. But, as Liz also says, it doesn't make up for the officers that are getting their pink slips Army-wide, as well as senior non-commissioned officers. And some of them, including Marines, are getting their pink slips while they're in the middle of a deployment to Afghanistan. You're in the middle of deployment, and you said, hey, get on a plane and head back to the States. You're out. It doesn't happen quite that quick, but because you have certain process you have to go to and as you separate. But, yeah, it's not exactly a morale builder when you're out there and getting shot at every day to be told, yeah, you're being put out because we just don't have room for you anymore. So think about all of that when you think about the Bergdahl thing. Look at what's going on in the Army at large, and worry about those things. Let the military do what it does best and do its own internal investigations as far as whether or not there's anything there with Bergdahl and his loyalty and his fidelity. But worry instead about what the administration is dictating as far as the force structure and cutting good people out of the military because they politically aren't aligned, or they're too apolitical, or they happen to sneeze in the wrong direction and it sounds like I don't like Obama or what have you. Whatever reasons there are out there. Or somebody made a mistake once, 5-10 years ago and have since made up for it, but because it's back there in their record, we need an excuse to cut the force, and you just gave it to us 10 years ago when you made one mistake when you were a 22-year-old lieutenant or a 23-year-old specialist E4. Look at that, guys. That's really a travesty, especially because that's happening to a lot of our good heroes out there. But now, since we're also already talking about Bergdahl, there's something else to consider. How much is he facing to make? Because he was in captivity for so long, he may or not have gotten his full paycheck while he was locked up, or his bank account may have been shut off, or whatever happened. Things like that happens when you are a POW. Ask the family of Matt Maupin what happened with all his back pay while he was still listed as missing in action until he was finally found and his body was repatriated. But the amount of back pay that Bowe Bergdahl is currently owed is about $350,000. $350,000. He's due, based on his rank, about $1,400 every 2 weeks. Bi-monthly, about $2,800 a month. And he has back pay for 5 years in captivity. And by law, he hasn't been convicted of anything. He hasn't been taken anything yet, or he hasn't had any reason to have his pay docked at all as of yet. So since he hasn't had it docked at all, you have to look at why not pay him? He's owed this money. If you're for taking care of our veterans and taking care of our soldiers, making sure they get the pay that's due them and the benefits that's due to them, you have to be on the side of give Bowe Bergdahl what he's owed for what he's already done, for the services he already rendered, for the time that he spent in captivity, and you have to until he's convicted. Without a conviction, he's due the money. This is his. So we should applaud the fact that they're actually going to give him back pay that he's due. So keep that in mind, folks. That's something else to remember in the whole Bowe Bergdahl thing. Now, one thing I will mention is the whole Bowe Bergdahl thing is a little bit of an obfuscation. It's something that's used to distract you from other things going on. I get up early this morning, and I go onto my TweetDeck. And one of the people I have who has a column on my TweetDeck, who I like to see what he's putting out, especially early in the morning, or if he's up really late at night, which makes things really interesting, is a man named Jamie Dupree. Jamie Dupree is the political columnist and reporter for the out of Atlanta for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I think is the name of it, AJC. He's also on WSB Radio with, he used to be on there with Neil Bortz. Now he's on with Herman Cain, I think. And I think he also does a spot now with Sean Hannity. So he's really gotten his name out there. Jamie Dupree. Jamie Dupree, as far as his reporting goes, is probably one of the most apolitical, unbiased, these are the facts, political reporters out there. It's hard to determine where his political affiliation is because there's almost zero bias in everything he writes. So you have to keep that in mind, because I've seen people from the left attack him as being far right. I've seen people from the right attacking him as being far left. And the reality is his reporting is neutral for the most part. Probably about 99.99% neutral, which is really a credit in these days, especially given a lot of the bias within the mainstream media, including Fox News, and when you talk about their strict news stories, not their commentators. So, Jamie's a credit to the profession. So when I look up there, and I see he was up past midnight, almost to 1 a.m., attending a hearing about the VA scandal and the whistleblowers going on there. Of course, I'm interested. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to get with my own sources and probably write something about that later this week, maybe even today. But Jamie has a great thing up on his blog over at AJC, and he talks about the hearing and the whistleblowers. And one of the things he has on there is even a notebook that's one of the people visiting the facility in Philadelphia went and snapped a picture of a notebook that actually listed a strategy to block the congressional committee hearings from finding out the truth, which should kind of scare you. The VA should ignore the investigations and stonewall them and keep them from seeing how our veterans are being treated, especially those who are going for medical treatment and medical help, many times for combat-related, if not service-connected injuries and illnesses. And Jamie Dupree reports further on, talking about Kristen Rule, one of the VA employees in Philadelphia, who is one of the whistleblowers, talking about how she tried to correct things, and when she tried to do the whistleblowing, she had all kinds of things happen to her. She goes outside and finds her car is all dented up. She gets threatened. She has her job threatened, moved around, all kinds of things happening to her. So if you go and read Jamie's article, if you have a chance to see it, he kind of details that. But I would just want to use that to talk about articles that were written by one of my good friends over at Brenner Brief News. Her name is Patricia Campion, and Patricia did some great investigative reporting on the VA scandal as it related to the clinics up in and around Buffalo, New York. She had some whistleblowers come out and give her information, give her interviews, and give her evidence. And some of her articles have even gone and been circulated among members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to kind of give them more evidence or more leads on where to go in the congressional investigation concerning the whistleblower retribution portion of the VA scandal. Well, if you go to Brenner Brief News and you look up Patricia Campion's articles on the VA, of which there's like 3 or 4, I think 3 hard news stories plus an op-ed that she wrote, you go down to the discussion section, and some of them have quite a bit of discussion going on. And you'll notice some people coming on there, and their main claim to fame is to try to attack the credibility of some of these sources, and also to attack Patricia's writing style and little typos that she had on the initial run of the story, and that, of course, got caught and fixed. And let me let you guys in on a little secret. When you post on a news site and their discussion, especially if it's through Discuss or Discus, however you want to pronounce that, or other discussion platforms, the moderators have capabilities to go and check your IP addresses and your account information. They can find out where you're posting from, if you have multiple accounts, a link to that IP address, etc., etc., etc. So we kind of found out who was doing some of these postings, because like one on her latest article listed his name as James Champion. Just went through and first, just try to nitpick the story apart. Basically tried to call all the whistleblowers liars, and just tried to completely obfuscate the truth behind these stories. Because if you go back and look at her stories, she has hard evidence, she has hard documentation that justifies what the blowers were talking about. And they sit there and try to say, oh no, that really didn't happen. Oh no, that person's not credible. Well, that's up to a jury to decide, or for Congress to decide whether they're credible or not. They should still be heard. And whether their testimony is credible or not is only determined by the jury or the judges or the congressman, the congressional panel. It's not up to Patricia Morrison from the SEIU and other people like her and union thugs and upper-level management at the VA who don't want to lose their jobs for being corrupt, complicit, or complacent. It's not up to them to judge whether whistleblowers are correct. It's up to them to mount a logical, evidentiary, empirical based defense, not to emotionally attack and attempt to get fired and harm these whistleblowers who are doing their jobs. The VA does have a fraud, waste, and abuse program. Of course, now it's used as a go ahead, drop your complaint so we know who to fire next program. The military has a fraud, waste, and abuse program. When you put something in the military and you have a legitimate claim of potential fraud, waste, or abuse, it gets investigated, and usually those involved get what's coming to them. They go behind court-martials or other non-judicial punishment or administrative actions. So why is that not happening within the VA? Very simply, because there is systemic corruption, and who's getting hurt? Our veterans families, the American taxpayers, and our country. So that makes us want to take that's just one big question. For those of you within the SEIU, I just want to know, do you love our country or do you hate it? Because if you love it, why are you targeting the people who are trying to make it better? Why are you trying to harm those who want to make sure that those who already earned these benefits, they're not handouts, they're earned benefits, make sure that they get what they deserve? Why are you against that? What is it? You want the money for your pocket instead? You have a cousin who's a welfare mom who you want to get free money for sitting on her duff and eating bonbons instead of getting a JOB or a GED? Why not take care of the constitutional obligations first? Then, after those are all taken care of and paid for, look at what's left in the revenue coffers and see what we can do to actually help these people who need a hand up. Not a handout, but a hand up. And let these veterans and the veterans programs serve as a proper example. You get rid of the fraud, you get rid of the corruption, you get rid of the crap, and do them right, and let the veterans have more of a say in these programs. And you'll notice that most veterans are people who just, they want a quick hand up, give me my help, you get me on my way, now get out of my way, let me go. If I need help again, I'll contact you, or I'll contact you and give you a status report later on, but thanks, see ya. That they really want to be more autonomous, want to go and accomplish their mission as a civilian. You know, that mission of taking care of themselves and taking care of their families through their own work and efforts, not through begging for handouts. What's wrong with that? Absolutely nothing. So let that serve as an example of how to run these other social justice programs. Instead, they're trying to change the VA into what is failing and not working. You know, the VA wasn't perfect, but it shouldn't be this bad. It should be a heck of a lot better than it is now. We shouldn't be backstepping to where it was in the late 70s or worse. Shame for shame for shame. And the unions are right there with the bureaucracy. In fact, in a lot of cases, they're the same people. For shame, for shame, for shame. Well, we're running low on time, and I had so many other things I wanted to discuss. Let me look what else I had in my little queue of things I wanted to discuss and see if there's anything more. I'm sure there was. But we've discussed, what have we talked about so far? We've talked about Bowe. We've talked about the veterans. We've talked about the whistleblowers. We've talked about the books being used for human sexuality classes given to little kids in the UK, and the potential of Common Core bringing that into our public schools here in the United States. We've talked about guns in Texas schools to protect the children. And we talked about Bowe. It's looking like it's almost about time to wrap it up for the day. So, with that all in mind, I think, oh yeah, there's still one last thing we wanted to cover from yesterday. I promised a clip from Ted Cruz talking about the border crisis. Let's give that one quick more try to play it for you and remind you about the inflowing border. One thing of note before I play this. So far, from stats I've seen, there have been over 150 children's bodies discovered along the border and along the Rio Grande River Valley here in Texas. And that's just that small area of the border. You have lots more as you continue out west into New Mexico and Arizona and Southern California. But just in that portion of southern Texas alone, over 150 dead bodies of children found in the river valley. Of those 150 plus, only one has been positively identified. The family borrowed money to give their kid over to coyotes and have him brought into the United States, and the kid did not make it. And guess what? The parents still owe the money to the people they borrowed it from in order to pay off the coyotes to smuggle their children. So think about that. 150 plus, and their parents don't know if they made it or not. So hopefully the parents there are considering that, or hopefully our people here in the United States are considering that as part of the message to send back to these countries. Do you know if your kid made it or not? Because if you don't, they may not have, and you just basically sentenced them to death. If you haven't heard back from them yet. That's probably what happened, or could be what happened. Anyway, let's hear what Senator Ted Cruz had to say. Come on, play.
Confirmation that the message of amnesty has been received by the parents who are entrusting the children to these drug dealers is the Border Patrol report that said 95% of those coming believed they would get a permiso. They believed they would be allowed to go scot-free here. That's the message that is being heard. It's why these children are being subjected to violence. You know, at Lackland Air Force Base, a senior official there described one child, a young Hispanic child who was a quadriplegic, who was paralyzed from the neck down. And the drug cartels had just abandoned him on the Texas side of the Rio Grande. They found him lying by the river on the other side of the river. That's the sort of care and consideration they're providing for these children. These children, what is happening to these children is horrific. And we are a compassionate nation. We've always been a compassionate nation. But any policy that continues children being abused by violent drug cartels is the opposite of compassion. And so I would ask two questions to my friend, the senior senator from Arizona. The first, I had this afternoon lunch with the Attorney General of Texas, Greg Abbott, who described that the Attorney General of Texas and the U.S. Attorney's Office have recently arrested an alleged terrorist in Texas with ties to ISIS, with ties to the radical Islamic terrorists who are right now wreaking havoc across Iraq and Syria. So the first question I would ask the senior senator from Arizona is, how significant does he see the threat of terrorists crossing our porous border and targeting the homeland? And then the second question that I would ask that is related: of the $3.7 billion that President Obama has requested in this supplemental bill, just $160 million is directed to Border Patrol agents and immigration judges, both. So less than 5% of the total actually goes to boots on the ground. And so the second question I would ask to the senior senator from Arizona is, in his judgment, is devoting less than 5% of the resources from this bill to boots on the ground a serious effort at securing the border and solving the problem?
I would say to my colleague, the answer to his second question is obviously no. And it's my understanding, if you break this down, this legislation, into individual illegal immigrant, it's like $80,000 per individual, a remarkable sum. I'll be glad to be corrected for the record if that's not true. But concerning the senator's first question, about a month ago, for the first time in Syria, an American citizen blew himself up as a suicide bomber in Syria. There are now thousands and thousands of Europeans. We believe there are as many as 100 United States, although that number varies, citizens, that are over fighting in Syria on behalf of the most radical terrorist organization, ISIS. And these many hundred of Europeans that are fighting there have, guess what, as European citizens of these countries in Europe, they have a visa. They can get on a plane tomorrow. They can get to a European country and get on a plane tomorrow and fly to the United States of America because they're a citizen of one of the European countries of which we have a visa-free agreement on. So our Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation have all said unequivocally that the events that are transpiring now in the largest, most wealthy, most influential, and largest center for terrorism between Syria and Iraq is breeding these people who have said they want to attack the United States of America. This guy Baghdadi, who is now the leader of ISIS, who apparently we saw on television preaching at a mosque in Mosul the other day, despite the fact there's $10 million on his head, said when he left our prison camp Bucca in Iraq, his last words were, "See you in New York. See you in New York." And I don't think he was joking. And so this also is clearly a national security issue over time as well, I say to my friend from Texas.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Senator Ted Cruz asking a question of Senator John McCain, and you heard John McCain's answer. John McCain may not be the most conservative Republican senator, but I think on the border, in many ways, he's right along with a lot of us on the need for border security for national security reasons, as well as immigration reform. Well, that leads us up to the end of the show, and we shall be back on tomorrow and the day after, and as long as we can until we're told to, till things change and we're no longer allowed to do the show. So as long as we can be here, we're going to be here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. Central. This is Paul-Gregory Matuszak, and this is the end of the Mouth of Matuszak radio show. Have a great day. Bye.